All right, shalom, shalom, shalom. First thing and foremost, I want to give all praises, all honor, and all glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rahak Radash. Secondly, I want to give double honors to my elders and my apostles of Great Millstone who taught me this truth in righteousness and in sincerity. And third of all, I want to give salutations to the hopeful elect that's out on the highways and on the byways teaching and preaching this word in truth and in sincerity. And the title of this lesson is going to be A Day of Darkness. Once again, a day of darkness. And that is going into the return of who the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ, which his true name is Yahweh Shai, which he is the son of the Heavenly Father, Yahweh. Yahweh meaning he is, or he to be, he exists. And Yahweh Shai's name meaning he saves, he is the deliverer, he delivers, because that is what he is coming to do. He is coming to save. But there's a balance because he is also coming to punish, he's coming to judge, he's coming to reward the righteous and to reward the wicked. If you worked your whole life, laboring wickedly, and you are going to receive a reward for that, the only reward to expect is a recompense for the wickedness that you labored for. That's going to be your paycheck. You're going to have a gruesome, a dark, troubling paycheck, because that's all your life was filled with. Your life was filled with bitterness. Your life was filled with hate. Your life was filled with all manners of evil. So that's what the Lord is going to reward you with. And the same thing with the righteous. Even though we're not perfect, Lord willing, we are of the righteous number that will continue to endure and be saved. The 144,000 right along with the 1/3. But that righteous number, they are ultimately the ones that are laboring to the best of their ability in righteousness, rehearsing the righteous acts to the best of their ability by obeying the commands that we have been given, which is to feed the flock, to abide in the commandments to the best of our ability, even though we fall and we slip up, doing it to the best of our ability and not just disregarding the law because we're under grace like the majority of our people do. When it comes to being brotherly, those who are also believers in Yahweh Shai, us to the best of our ability, keeping the peace with the brotherhood and being genuine and showing charity, speaking to myself firstly in all of these things, when it comes to seeking the Lord and increasing in our wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, by listening to the teachers, the prophets, the men that have been laboring before us and even after us that are filled with the Holy Spirit, listening to them and learning from them, which is us learning from the Lord, because the Lord speaks to us through them, and us going and as we learn, teaching, and also just seeking in the scriptures with the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding and the foundation that we receive once we're brought into this truth. Speaking to myself firstly, us going into the scriptures, us going into the history, us going into the different facets of the truth ourselves, to learn it ourselves, so that we can truly have it within us and become a better teacher. The men that do those things, they are going to receive a righteous reward, which is salvation. No evil being able to befall them. That scripture that goes, no weapon formed against thee shall prosper. Everybody love to quote that, but that's only relevant for the elect, for the faithful, and ultimately for those who were predestined to be saved. Because even those who try to do righteous works, they try to imitate the men of the Lord, or the ones that have, they've known the truth, they believed in the 100% truth. If you're not of the elect, you're not going to last. Eventually, you're going to fall off. You're going to go off somewhere. Something is going to happen to where you are going to, disassociate. You're going to forsake the Lord, whether you realize it or not. And you are going to be given that wicked reward, the reward of the unrighteous. But woe unto you that desire the day of the Lord, because that woe is going into those who are the unbelievers. The believers in the true and living power, Yahweh Bahashim Yahweh Shai, they understand what I just said, when it comes to the circumstances of the return of Yahweh Shai, that there's a chance that we that we will not make it, but there's also a chance that we will, and that we're not perfect, but to the best of our ability, we have to continue to endure and do the things that we have been commanded to do. So it's a fearful thing, but we also, the day of the Lord is the fearful thing, but it's also something that the elect, the faithful, the believers, something that they have faith that they will be saved from when it comes to the destruction, the gruesome judgments and killings and murderings that we're about to be seeing, even before Yahweh Shai appears in the clouds, because he's already visiting this place through the Spirit, through breaking this place down piece by piece, through the preaching of this gospel, through the prophecies coming to pass, the things that were written aforetime playing out right in front of our face. We seeing the uprising of the civilians in America, Egyptian against Egyptian, which this is spiritual Egypt, because just how we were enslaved in Egypt and we built up Egypt, and we were the reason why it was so glorious, and we brought all of the culture and we brought everything of value to Egypt. We're the reason why it was so valuable. And it's the same thing here. They benefit off of us. You got the so-called Mexicans building up all of these establishments, which is a tribe, one of the tribes of the nation of Israel, being Issachar. And you got all of us building up this place when it comes to, the entertainment, when it comes to the music, everything, the wine, the food, all of these things, our enemies, the so-called white man, Esau, Edom, he took these things from us, the knowledge, the wisdom of these things, that we were given through the Lord, that sought, the Spirit of the Lord being within his people, which is the nation of Israel. Esau, Edom, the so-called white man, extracted these things from us, forced us to build up his society, doing all of these things, using us to better himself and his society, just to keep us oppressed. And in Egypt, they also doubled the oppression on the nation of Israel and made it harder for them, because they knew that they were mightier than them, that they were greater, that they had more potential, they were smarter, they were stronger, they were more charming, they were more charismatic, they were more gifted. And that's the same thing that's happening right now. That's why we are oppressed above all of the other nations that are not the so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, because everybody knows who the true children of the Lord is. But it says, Salakia for being, long-winded, but I'm going to start reading now. It says in Amos chapter 5 and verse 18, woe unto you that desire the day of the Lord, Yahweh Ba'ashim Yahweh Shai. Right, so woe unto you that desire that day, thinking that Jesus Christ about to come and save everybody, that all nations are going to be saved, that you are already saved because you was dipped backwards in some water and it, shot in your nose and you almost drowned, and the pastor told you that you were saved. All of these other religions that our people rely on. You got the Egyptology, you got Islam, You got these Buddhists thinking that they go transcend their body. You got these atheists out here thinking that, they are the Most High. You got all of these different ideologies and these people trusting in these different forms of salvation. And you even got false prophets calling on Yahushua, Israelites that know that they're Israelites, and they know now that they're not so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans. You even got them calling on the wrong names, Yeshaya, Yahushua, all of these different false prophets calling on these names, and even some of them using the true name, Yahushai. They are all going to be destroyed, and woe unto them for desiring the Lord to come back, because as it says right here, to what end is it for you? Right, because that day is not for them. It's for the 144,000 right along with the 1/3, the men that truly believe, and they are humbly, with fear, and with faith, desiring for the Lord to come back. They're not desiring for the Lord to come back like the Lord go come back and you automatically go get saved. You got a lot of these people thinking that when Yahushua comes back, that's when they just automatically go be saved, and there's no chance that they're gonna perish. No man knows but the Father. So, when it comes to the day, no man knows but the Father. But we don't know if we are of the elect or not. So we have to stay humble and continue to do what we were commanded to do up until the end. So it says the day of the Lord is darkness and not light. Right. So it's going to be darkness. It's going to be chaos. That word woe, let me grab that right quick in the definition of it. Hold on. It says woe. So let's grab this. Woe meaning misery, trouble, great sorrow or distress. Woes, things that cause sorrow or distress, troubles. Right. So it literally says things that cause troubles or distress. That's going to be the power going out, famine of bread, the food not being shipped in no more. You're going to have society breaking down, people already out in the streets rioting. People already out on the streets turning on each other. You got ICE out here. That is a woe. That is a distress. That's something that's bringing misery. You got people getting snatched up, they children getting taken, they wives, husbands getting taken, they getting taken with their children, or the children getting left by themselves and the parents getting taken by ICE. You got killings happening. It's only the beginning of these things. You got all of this lawless behavior in the ghettos and the hood, that's increasing. Lawlessness, running in the stores, breaking the windows, jumping in and stealing. All of these miseries, when it comes to natural disasters, earthquakes, you got all of these forest fires and, these different judgments that the Lord is bringing upon this place, which are woes, miseries, troubles. It says the day of the Lord Yahweh Shai is darkness and not light. Right, that's that darkness. All of these troubles that's going to be brought, including the famine of the word, which is the men of the Lord no longer standing out on the highways and byways and uploading lessons to preach this truth. Because the elect are going to be sealed and the word is going to fully fulfill what it was sent out to fulfill, which is feeding the flock and nursing them unto perfect health according to their lot, nursing them to the point where they are sealed, and they are prepared for the word to be taken off of the streets and for judgment to come. That's when the light, we are the light of the world, Yahweh Shah said. So once the Lord takes us off the streets, once the Lord shuts our mouth, the light is no longer going to be within this world being preached, being spread. It's just going to be the darkness and the truth that the light was shining. But these people, they love darkness. It says, and this is going into, a physical representation of the darkness, and how it's not going to be escapable. It says in verse 19, as if a man did flee from a lion and a bear met him. Right, so you was fleeing from a lion. You managed to get away from the lion, but the Lord had a bear right there waiting for you. And now you got to flee from that bear. And when it comes to a lion and a bear is more gruesome. It will tear you apart while you still alive. With a lion, you got a better chance of being killed early. It going for your throat, taking you out so that you're not moving. But a grizzly bear, it's gonna rip you to shreds, and while you still alive, it's just gonna maul you, And then when it comes to escaping, you may have a better chance escaping a lion than a grizzly bear. They climbing with you, they swimming with you, they doing all of these things with you, and when it comes to their speed, man, ain't no escaping. So if you was to manage to get away from it, it says, as if a man did flee from a lion and a bear met him, or went into the house and laid his hand on the wall and a serpent bit him. Right, so you go into a house, and you lay your hand on the wall, you tired, you may have just been going through a situation, you escaped the bear, and you in the house, and you leaning your hand on the wall, and now you got a serpent that bites you. So no matter how many, the Lord is going to be taking these wicked people through a lot of different trials, a lot of different terrors, a lot of different horrific situations, just to lead up to them being destroyed in the end. They may get away from this person that hated them or that they had a disagreement with while the society was still going, and now that person is hunting them down. Once all hell breaks loose, they get away from that person, or they end up killing that person and not being killed by that person, just for them to run into a psychopath that's a cannibal, and that cannibal go ahead and, get the ups on them and, snatch them up, and now you getting tortured. You got somebody eating your body and right in front of you. It's all manners of horrific events that's going to be playing out, and there's going to be no escape. You can't escape. You think leaving America is going to help you? Wherever you are, the judgment that the Lord has set for you is going to play out, and that's just the bottom line. So it says in verse 20, shall not the day of the Lord Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai be darkness and not light, even very dark and no brightness in it? Right. So there's not going to be any brightness, no mercy, no grace, because that's the time we're in right now. That's why this word is being preached. But when the Lord takes away this word from being preached out on the streets and on social media, it's going to be nothing but judgment. That's going to be the time that we're going to be living in, the time of judgment. And there's going to be no light. It's going to be straight darkness for these people. But for the elect, for those who believe in Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai, they will have light, because they are the light. That light is Yahweh Shai dwelling within them. And he is going to be with them up until the end, when he comes back and saves them from the nuclear fire, which is, that's when it's going to be the complete darkness, the day of the Lord, when he cracks them clouds, and it's nothing but fire consuming this place from him and the fathership and the so-called UFOs, which are the chariots of the angels, the vehicles that the angels ride in and that Yahweh Shai himself rides in. When they come back and they in the clouds shooting down concentrated fire, in the form of lasers, destroying this place right along with the nuclear bombs that are going to rain on this place and completely destroy it. There's not going to be a city or a state here left. This place is going to be completely destroyed. You know, so everybody here that's not of the elect, they are also going to be destroyed with this place, right along with everything that they was attached to. You know, but I'm gonna come over here. So now to go into the famine of the word right fast. This is Amos 8 and 11. It reads, "Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will send a famine in the land, not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water." Right, that is coming. But this is saying that's not what the Lord is speaking about regarding this famine. But we are going to see a famine of bread. We are going to see a famine of water. You know, the water ain't gonna be running no more. You know, the bottles of water ain't gonna be in the stores. Everybody gonna be snatched up everything. It's gonna get bad. But it says, "Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, Yahweh B'Hashem Yahweh Shai, that I will send a famine in the land, not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord Yahweh B'Hashem Yahweh Shai." Right. So that is going to be the famine. The words of the Lord is no longer going to be heard. This truth, the understanding, the guidance, you know, which is a form of protection, is no longer going to be preached and heard when it comes to these people and that don't believe, you know, and that's not listening right now. They're no longer going to be able to hear these things. They're no longer going to be able to scroll and watch lessons. You know, it says, "And they shall wander from sea to sea," and that's going into doctrine to doctrine. They gonna be wandering, you know, trying to find people, trying to go to the false prophets, try to go to us, you know, trying to find us, trying to find anybody that has a form of wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. But it says, "And they shall wander from sea to sea, and from the north even to the east," right? So they gonna be going all over the place looking, searching for safety and salvation and guidance, you know, trying to figure out what's going on. "They shall run to and fro and seek the word of the Lord, Yahweh B'Hashem Yahweh Shai," right? So that's ultimately what they're gonna be looking for, the men of the Lord. You know, they gonna be going through all manners of people trying to find the men of the Lord, you know. But it says, "And shall not find it." So they're not going to find it. They're going to seek in vain because they didn't seek the Lord when he was able to be found, which is right now. You know, they chose to wait until it was too late. So it says in Amos 8 and 13, "In that day shall the fair virgins," right? So the good looking, you know, young virgins, you know, when it comes to Eve, you know, you women out here that's all about your looks, you know, all about this and that, you know, you got your, yeah, it says, "In that day shall the fair virgins and young men faint for thirst." Right, they're going to be lacking the water of life, you know, which is this truth, the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, you know. They are going to, it says, faint for thirst. You know, they're going to perish. They're going to, you know, pass out. They're going to die without this water of life, you know, without this truth, you know. So they're going to be going all around, breaking their neck, trying to find the men of the Lord, trying to find this water, you know, this living water, and they're not going to find it. And they ultimately are going to, you know, they are going to die of dehydration, you know, which is not being hydrated in truth, you know, but they're going to be dry just like this place, you know, dry of truth, you know, dry of righteousness, dry of humility, dry of faith. That's what this place is. It's dry of all of these things, and that's what they are going to be. That's what they already are, but it's going to fully manifest in these days. And this is all coming soon, you know. But it says in Proverbs 2 and 3, this is going into the prudent And, the unbelievers, the wicked unbelievers, which is our people, so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, we are the ones who are supposed to be believing in the Lord, but you got the majority of our people that don't and that won't, and they're going to die because of their unbelief. It says in Proverbs 22 and 3, Salakia, a prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself. Right, so what is that word prudent man? Let's look that up right fast. Prudent, what does that mean? Prudent means wise, cautious. It also means acting or showing care and thought for the future. Right, so you're being wise. Wise going into, wisdom, wise judgment. You judging wisely before you act, which is what we're doing right now. Us repenting to the best of our ability, getting up when we fall, continuing to call and believe on the Lord, But ultimately, this is going into when it comes to all hell breaking loose, when it comes to the persecution of the men of the Lord, when it comes to all of the terrors that the Lord is about to bring to this place. The men of the Lord, they are being prudent, and they will be prudent in that day, which is, as it says, acting with or showing care and thought for the future. And they are going to hide themselves, as it says. It says, a prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself. Right, so we not going to be out here trying to protest against the troops when martial law is established. We not going to be out here trying to walk up on ICE and protest against what they doing, trying to preach the word to them, and bring them into the fold. We not going to be doing these things. We not going to be trying to force the course of the river, when they start deleting bros channels and, making it to where our videos cannot be watched. The Lord is going to let us know through the Spirit, this is the time to be silent now, and to just watch me work, so we are going to hide ourselves through the Spirit and power of Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai. The men of the Lord, the men of the Lord are going to know through the Spirit when that time is, but it says, but the simple pass on and are punished. The simple are our people, the majority of our people. They're simple because they over here believing in the man that enslaved them. They over here believing in a so-called savior, which is in the image of the same nation that enslaved us, that fed our babies to alligators, that still got us, that cut our women's stomach open, let the baby fall out and stumped on their heads. The same people that still got us in captivity right now, that's still oppressing us, that still got us on the low, they ain't gave us no apology, through actions or through word, but our people still trusting in what these people tell us and trusting that they are here for our best interests. They poisoning our food, they poisoning the water, spraying everything, taking out all of the beneficial crustaceans out of the water, so now the waters can't even be used properly. They are destroying this place, cutting down all of the trees, all of these, locking up the animals, and just murdering the earth, destroying the earth and the creation, everybody here, polluting everything. But our people still trust in this. Our people still trust in these people. But they don't trust and they don't believe what we're saying. The men that are preaching this truth and that's telling our people what it is. They believe that they can still eat. They can eat pork, they can eat shrimp, crab, and lobster when the law tells them that they cannot. But they believe because Yahweh Shai shed his blood, he went through all of that for us to be able to defile ourselves. That's simple. So the simple pass on and are punished, right? They are not going to acknowledge And they're not going to understand how severe and how bad these times are about to get. So they still gonna be playing games. They still gonna be trying to be proud and buck up. You know, they still gonna be trying to preach and prophesy. These false prophets, you know, they gonna be getting caught up in all of these different situations because they gonna be in areas where they're not supposed to be, where it's not wise to be. You know, you may see some false prophets out here, these so-called Israelites, trying to interact with ICE, you know, and trying to prevent and, you know, do all kind of things that's going to bring persecution to the nation of Israel. You know, in the men of the Lord, they're going to see these things and hide themselves through the spirit and power of Yahweh B'Shem Yahawashi. But it says in Proverbs 22:4, by humility and the fear of the Lord Yahweh B'Shem Yahawashi are riches and honor and life. Right, so it says by humility and the fear of the Lord, humbling ourselves and fearing the Lord, you know, having that reverence, having that respect for the Lord, you know, fearing what the Lord can do to us, you know, if we disobey, you know, and that's a humble thing, you know, because we see what happens and we see how you can be if you're not fearing the Lord, saying you saved, you know, the Lord know your heart, and saying it like you just good, like the Lord is with you and you 100% sure, like that's proud. You know, that's not humble. That's not fear of the Lord. And it says, by humility and the fear of the Lord Yahweh B'Shem Yahawashi are riches. Right, spiritual riches, us storing our riches up in heaven. You know, understanding that there's better things to come, that we are going to be rewarded for our labor of love, you know, and that we are going to be abundantly rich in the kingdom of heaven. It says in honor, the Lord is going to honor us and exalt us even before the kingdom of heaven, you know, showing that we were the prophets, if we be that number, you know, that we were telling the truth and that everybody else was lying. You know, everybody is going to see it, just like everybody is going to see Yahawashi. You know, it says, and life, you know, the life that comes in this truth, us being brought back to the true names of our power, you know, us being called by, you know, our names. You know, the Lord said, I'll call you by thy name. You know, the Lord gives us our Hebrew names, you know, us knowing, you know, the Lord might reveal your tribe to you, you know, through the Spirit. Us being brought back to the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. All of these things is life, because it's our life. You know, that's what we were created to do. That's what we were created to be. Call upon Yahweh B'Shem Yahawashi, keep the commandments perfectly, but we can't do that right now, but doing it to the best of our ability. You know, that's enough right now, because Yahawashi, he did it for us. It says in Proverbs 22:5, thorns and snares are in the way of the forward, right, going into the contrary. You know, let's look this up right fast. The forward of a person difficult to deal with, contrary, right, so that's the forward. You know, thorns and snares are in their pathway. They're going to be caught up. You know, they're going to be trapped. Many different things is going to be catching the wicked of our people. You know, the 2/3, the majority of our people. They're going to be thorned, they're going to be snared, you know. But it says, he that doth keep his soul shall be far from them. Right, so the Lord is going to keep us from them. That's going into the feminine of the word. We are going to hide ourselves. The Lord is going to hide us, you know. And it says, he that keep his soul shall be far from them. Right, so let's continuing to believe in the Lord, continuing to do what we are commanded to do to the best of our ability. You know, continuing to worship the Lord. You know, be brotherly. You know, all of these things that we were commanded to do, and falling and getting back up to the best of our ability every time. You know, that's keeping our soul. We're going to be preserved from these dangers. We're going to be, you know, taken away from these situations. You know, we're going to see a lot of things happen, but the Lord's not going to allow these things to happen to us, for us to be harmed and danger, you know. So that was the point of this lesson. I hope you brothers and sisters was edified, and that I was able to bring this point out clearly. But until next time, shalom.